not deprived of that money. So these are the two main goals. So it was introduced in January 2009 in the upper house of the parliament, and it's still under scrutiny. There's been a select committee appointed to scrutinize the bill, come up with the flaws, and hopefully make it so that people can act on it, pass it, and have it as an act, basically. So the specific goals, as you can interpret from reading the text, is that it encourages institutes to commercialize their patents. Although it doesn't really mention commercializing, it doesn't give you ways to commercialize it. All it really says is, okay, it's mandatory for you to patent. So there's an equation that they assume in this, patenting equals commercialization, which is somewhat not convincing. And it also brings more accountability to public funded institutes. That's always because they're saying, okay, fine, mandate everything that you have. And it encourages creativity, innovation, collaboration, and commercialization of technology. That's what they say in the mission statement. But the actual act itself has nothing really that does that, except for maybe saying, okay, everyone has to mandate, but that does not necessarily increase technology transfer. So it does, however, enhance awareness about IP issues from the ground up, since everyone, students and faculty, are patenting, big or small, they mention B. So lessons from the US Bayh-Dole Act. I guess this part will be more clear once we go to the second presentation. But really quickly, the revenues gained from patenting at publicly funded institutes are just not enough. Through the various case studies that I've seen, they barely break even. And US universities did patent before Bayh-Dole Act. It wasn't that there was no patenting at all. Similarly, in India, there is encouraging to patenting, and I'm not sure if this assumption is clear. Okay, so the rate of patenting was strongly related to the advent of biotechnology and the spree of patenting following this particular US Supreme Court case. So the Bayh-Dole Act had different reasons why it went through and why it passed. Those reasons do not necessarily apply to India right now in its present condition. This is also an older act, 20 years ago, 30 years ago now, I believe. And the demands of the society are different these days. Okay, so the general criticism is that there is a disconnect between the objectives of the bills and the efficacy of the provisions, just like I mentioned in some of the points earlier. The laws governing patenting of publicly funded research exist anyways, based on the 1970s Patent Act, which provides for and encourages patenting. But under the Indian Bayh-Dole Act, there will be heavy penalties imposed on those that fail to patent. 50% of their research grant they will have to pay as fine if they fail to patent. And you could have a huge grant, and you could make one small invention out of it, just for one small needle off of a reactor that you're making, which is worth $2. And the reactor making project could be worth $5 million. And you basically let go of that $2.5 million you have to pay in fine just because you did not declare that particular needle was somehow a new invention. It's just, it's a very heavy penalty to impose, and one of the reasons why it's so difficult to pass this particular bill. And then it does not address the bottlenecks associated with technology transfer and commercialization of patents. India is a huge country. It's over 1 billion people. And if all these people are trying to patent every single innovation, there's going to be a lot of workload on the people dealing with licensing and patenting, and that's basically going to be a bottleneck. And in essence, you will be hindering any sort of advancement in terms of science and technology, because those people that are waiting for the licenses that have truly valuable innovations are going to have to wait years or however long to get their license up in the market. So that's just adding a real burden, I believe. And to support that point, US institutes rarely break even after paying the patenting cost. Okay? All right. So some of the assumptions in the Indian Bayh-Dole Act is prior to the Bayh-Dole Act in the US, in cases where the government retained the rights to a patent, the rate of commercialization was very low. But the fact is that in India, the government agencies do not even retain the patent. So that argument is not applicable to profess and to have this bill passed. The Indian Patent Act of 1970 already encourages, like I had previously mentioned, publicly funded universities to work out contracts that specify agreement of assignment of patent between employer and employee. When you join a national lab, when you join a university as a researcher, you kind of sit with the national lab or university. They tell you, okay, if you have an innovation, we'll give you such and such percent. And it's typically really good. They don't deprive their scientists in terms of percent share. It's usually typically sometimes even over 30%. So all that's already in place. So promoting accountability. How will it, so the bill assumes that this will promote accountability, and one of the papers that I read had the following comment: using patent numbers to promote accountability is akin to killing an ant with an elephant gun. If you have a problem with people not patenting, it's just ridiculous to come up with a whole new act and have it pass through the parliament, the two houses, have the prime minister sign it and the president sign it, when there's a basic policy issue with people not being encouraged to patent. That's just, I don't know, I think there's a problem right there in the policy, not necessarily the laws of the country. Okay. So patenting will promote technology transfer. In 2008, CSIR, which is the largest national lab in India, it's a network actually, basically commercialized only 5.7% of its patents. On the other hand, Stanford University, which is a much more established institution, has patented over 37% of its inventions. So to hope that commercialization of indigenous products will increase just because you're increasing patents does not necessarily sound right. Like I mentioned before, you can patent, but that does not guarantee that your product will be out there in the market if you don't know how to commercialize it. If the infrastructure for commercialization just lacks in the country, it's not going to happen. Then, promoting the innovation culture. It is difficult to establish a direct correlation between greater patenting and greater innovation. Points that I made earlier. More royalties. Like I said, under the Patents Act, there's already a culture where employers sit with employees and work out an agreement as to what will happen if there is an innovation made. So to assume that giving 30% of the benefits, well, there are already people that get more than 30% of the share. Not very frequently, but when they do they get more than 30% of the share. The leading institutions, like I said, get more than 30%. Okay. So doing a cost-benefit analysis and hoping that such an act would actually bring money to the universities. So the bill aspires to make Indian universities wealthy and self-sufficient. Now here's a comment from MIT's Head of Technology and Licensing Office. The direct economic impact of technology licensing on the universities themselves has been relatively small, a surprise to many who believe that royalties could compensate for declining federal support of research. Most university licensing offices barely break even. And that's the truth. In fact, in CSIR, the Indian National Lab, they paid $2.5 million for patenting, whereas they only got $1 million out of the commercialization that they had done, the licensing revenues. So they're definitely not making profit. They're not even breaking even. They're in a loss. The technical shortcomings is the bill forces all public funding. This is just something that's there in the text. Just basically the public funded institutions are the ones that are forced to patent, but there needs to be, I guess, private institutions that are given public money should be addressed as well, and they're not. There is a failure to comply with results in severe. Yeah, that I've already mentioned. Failure to comply results in severe penalties, including a fine equivalent to 50%. The case I explained earlier with the reactor example. Then under the US Bayh-Dole Act, institutions that perform funded research enjoy largely unfettered discretion to determine whether IP rights are appropriate, taken by a paper from Eisenberg and Rye. And that's very much true. Under the US Bayh-Dole Act, they're not forced to declare every single invention that they have, no matter how small or how big, how trivial it is, or how important it is. But if this bill were to be passed, that would be the case. Yes, please.
I'm still not, that second point, you made that point several slides previous, and I still don't understand it. Why do they have these penalties? What's the justification behind it? And who pays the penalty if understand it. I'm sure you were clear.
No, maybe I was not clear. Maybe the point itself is not clear because it's not that clear to me either. Well, the thing is, they said it's the people whom the money has gone to, they need to pay that much in fine. So the university.
Why would they have to pay a fine? What did
That's
they
the
do?
whole point. I was going to get to it later. It
Oh,
seems
I'm
like
sorry.
it's a criminal act. Well, I don't specify it as much, but they penalize it as though people are criminals by not patenting it. You know,
What's
and
their intention? What do they want? Why do they want to force the patent?
it's just an incentive for people to patent. They're just,
That's a
you know,
pretty big incentive.
that is. It is. They're just terrorizing people who better patent.
So I'm playing around with this in my head now. I'm wondering if there's something like, if this needle or whatever that you said that you came up with, you know, if that ends up being something which, you know, some other organization then can grab, right, and use, and they end up being able to make a more effective or more efficient product, which more people are buying, and then you know, a couple of years later, you're like, oh, it's really this needle. We didn't realize it when we first invented it, and we didn't patent it then. But now that's become key to make this other product successful. They've been made, you know, they've made all this money. If we would have patented it then we would be able to
Yeah,
have
but that's the
percentage
loss
of
to the institution, not to the government.
Not to the government.
See, I think I would interpret, I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
guessing now, I would interpret it that it has to do with foreign competition.
Right, yeah.
You know, that they really want, what they really are trying to do is encourage the Indian scientists to patent this before someone from another country does. But I don't know. Is that true?
I was thinking it was more of an enforcement issue. I didn't think about it like that, but that it very well could be.
Well, I was just trying to tease out what the, why, I mean, that seems so
Yeah.
different. That's
Right.
I'm trying to use the word.
50% of the grant. Yep, that is different. And I haven't had an explanation. A lot of these facts are not, or provisions are not actually backed up by numbers. And that's one thing I didn't like. Like, they were saying certain things, but were not giving statistics or numbers or anything.
Well,
So-
it's just, I mean, my understanding of the Bayh-Dole Act, which is not at all complete, is that it was to allow faculty to be able to patent these inventions and commercialize them, which in prior time it wasn't, because they considered everything done under government grants in the public domain. And so the Bayh-Dole Act encouraged faculty to be entrepreneurial, commercialize and patent things. But this goes a long step further if they're actually, you know, giving these severe penalties if they don't do it.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I'm just trying to get a handle on, anyway, maybe you'll get to it, but I'm trying to get my head around that. That's very difficult.
Right. And another thing to notice is any of these provisions in the Bayh-Dole bill does not really facilitate commercialization by any means. All it's saying is patenting, and what do you get if you don't patent? It's not addressing the actual technology transfer aspect of it. So in that way, it lacks to address the objective that it's hoping to achieve. Okay, so some of the quick fixes, and these have been suggested by Bashir and Guha, whom I had quoted earlier with an elephant gun and ant analogy. Okay, so give more power to scientists and let them decide whether innovation is worthy of being patented or not, instead of just making them do something. Almost sounds like, yeah, anyways. So yeah, the bill should encourage other forms of knowledge transfer also, should have public interest safeguards. Rights should not be issued to a single entity, but it should make sure that, so that would check monopolies from being formed. Exclusive licenses can often be more enticing to technology transfer offices, but can do long-term damages. So this is basically trying to avoid monopolies in the society, which would be detrimental to the science and technology regime. Licenses should have affordable pricing to benefit the society. And it should also make distinction between intramural and extramural research. Right now, the bill as it is talks a little bit about private companies, but it really doesn't say that private companies that are getting public money will have the same penalties imposed on them or same regulations imposed on them as public universities. So it's in effect even incomplete in that sense. Some recommendations. Then, if the patenting is low in India, the government, these are policy regulations mostly, or philosophical recommendations. If the patenting is low in India, the government should find specific reasons for such a case. And as I said, patenting does not equal technology transfer. A detailed study should be performed to evaluate the impact and rate of influence of patents. Just blindly following something that has worked in some other country, in this case the US Bayh-Dole, and then assuming that it's going to work in India is just not the way to go. Private parties that receive money from government should also be included. Harsh fines should be reduced. The bill is not punishing criminal acts. The bill should be easy to change, else it would be difficult to reverse, because it would have to go through the parliamentary procedure, pass both houses and things like that, and which can have huge impacts on society. Something like this. On the positive note, tighter IP regulation is necessary to stay competitive in the global market. Greater IP protection is necessary for better innovation. It can be a good tool for technology transfer. If implemented properly, it can increase awareness about IP from the ground up, since the students and the faculty are also taking part in it. It can be aimed to encourage smaller and medium enterprises, which right now are lagging behind. It can increase collaboration between different government and private institutes. Private institutes being pretty much none, it could also encourage them from coming up. And then these are some points that I just saw on blogs. So these are not really backed up by any statistics or anything like that, or in a formal journal or anything. So some people are worried, the left side is negative, some people are worried that healthcare will become unaffordable. Right now, the prices of medicines are fairly, I think they're not as, the scenario is not as bad in the US, they're pretty affordable. If patenting were made mandatory, those might go up. Educators would like diffusion of knowledge. Some of the professors had comments that knowledge should be imparted without any regulations and rules. And if universities become driven by industry, the academia will get more competitive and less sharing. They would want to save their own work and not necessarily give each and every detail of what they're doing. And right now, any professor if you go to university is very willing to share, and same with national labs. They would just send the papers out. They sometimes they're not even aware of IP laws, which is a sad situation. So the good part, it will shift focus from true research to service to industry. Well, that can be good or bad, but at least you're addressing the concerns of what's going on globally. It will help innovation. It will give inventors a fair share. Again, this part, even though a lot of people talk about it, this is kind of, a lot of people do get a fair share, so I don't know if this is really the part, I put it out there anyway. The government can use it as a way to actually address the needs of the country, and to sort of have their funds given in a way which address, I don't know, poverty or healthcare, rather than anything that an inventor or a research scientist wants to work on. In conclusion, institutions might not be presenting due to lack of funds or awareness. It's not that, yeah. An undue infrastructure which mandates patenting without regards to relevance will not only increase transaction costs, but will create bottlenecks that will hinder the transfer of truly valuable technology. Again, if such a thing were to pass, I can't imagine, because there'll be people basically with things that are important to the country, and they'll have to wait in the line until some little innovations got the clearance, and that will just delay the whole procedure and make it ineffective. And it will not help the country in any way. Consider a policy change rather than a law change, which is typically more difficult to reverse and change. So with that, that's the end of the presentation, and those are the references.
I hate to ask you to do this,
Yeah.
but you went through this so fast that I didn't have a chance to actually take notes and
Sorry.
get the questions. I wondered if you would mind going through your slides again.
Again? Okay.
Just as a recap.
Okay.
I understand where you're going with this, but I still don't understand. I think if you went back to the beginning, I would understand. We would understand the basics of the law a little
Okay.
bit better.
Okay. All right.
The other thing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go there. You don't have to go there.
Okay.
But
Let's start with the beginning of this law.
That,
That's
yeah.
the problem with it. Is that what you're thinking?
yeah, the main provision.
There's some background entries that were pretty interesting in terms of what are the drivers of certain behaviors that you see as thwarting innovation.
Right.
Can you amplify any perspectives there?
Yeah, they're worried that they're not competing as well in the global market.
Right.
And they're worried that a lot of people have these ideas, they're just not patenting it.
Okay.
And so they're worried about technology transfer. And so they found an easy way out, it seems to me, and they just took the US Bayh-Dole Act and framed
Sure.
something based on that.
In your research, did you uncover any information in terms of the nature of the patent securement process? You know, its kind of key steps and complexity as well as the economics. Is there anything there that could be construed, you know, by the prospective applicants that they just don't want to do
Right.
it? It's either too tedious or expensive.
Okay, so I haven't come across anything specific defining the actual process yet. The patenting laws as is in India, they seem to be kind of tedious because, like I was giving the example of CSIR, you know, they in patenting, they spent $2.5 million, and in the license that they did get, you know, just thinking about it, 5.5% of all the innovations that are patented, they only
Right.
commercialized those, and they got $1 million.
Right.
So definitely the infrastructure there to be able to patent is a lot complicated. The infrastructure to commercialize must be a lot complicated. Because if a given company is only commercialized 5.5% and it's going in loss, like I would just say, why don't we commercialize more and then, you know, get out of that loss? But it just is so difficult to do that they're willing to take up the loss.
But the bottleneck or the obstacle there could be the patent process itself and
Yeah.
its economic implications that cause people just to want to avoid it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That my point was. The legal the legal requirements and the patent process itself is just so complicated.
Well, this, I mean, you know, I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand the policy motivation behind it. The Bayh-Dole Act was, I think, motivated only in part to encourage universities to patent more and to commercialize their inventions, because the universities by and large didn't. So only a small percentage, I think, ever commercialized anything from these federal grants. It would be interesting to see, you know, the results of Bayh-Dole, whether it actually resulted in any of this.
I think there was another motivator there, Victor, when that was, you know, formed, because that was a debate that went on for years, that they didn't want a lot of prospectively viable technology outside of the core application, because a lot of it was classified defense work to be locked up, you know, basically in a government safe someplace, so it couldn't be commercialized, you know, in other markets, non-government markets.
So you think that was the motivation?
That was one. It was one other motive. I didn't phrase it too eloquently, but you know, the issue was they didn't want to eliminate any further ROI on that investment, or economic value being generated from that investment.
See, I thought it was just, to allow in the U.S. to allow the scientists to get royalties from their invention, even if it was on a government grant. Before that, like when I did my thing and commercialized my research, I had to be very careful not to
Right.
get a government grant.
Right.
Because if I had gotten a government grant, that would have been in the public domain, I couldn't have commercialized it.
Right.
So I thought it was to redress that.
That was the primary motive of it.
That was the motivation. And what I'm trying to get at here is, here we are, you know, I don't know, 25 years later in India, and the Indian policymakers are saying this is not only designed to allow faculty and staff at universities to commercialize their inventions, but requiring it.
Yeah, we're going to punish you if you don't do it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get get a handle on, you know, why that would be.
It seems like you're asking the question that I want to ask too. It's just that, like, your argument against this is so compelling that I'm looking for more of an argument for it. Like, why would that be a motivation? Like, you gave some, but some of those penalties, it just seems so incredible. Now, we have crazy things in our law too, like statutory damages for copyright infringement. They're just crazy. And that can happen, but there is a reason for that, because there is a powerful group of people who wanted those crazy things.
Well, I suspect there's a reason for this, but I
just want to, yeah, I'm wondering if you knew what that was.
I'm not sure what it is.
Well, it might be that economic obstacle.
Well, it could be sort of like, you know, sudden sees as part of its critical mission to improve the economy of the state. All of a sudden. I mean, this is like, it's never figured that out in the last 40 years, even though Stanford and MIT and all these others had done it for a long time. So it seems to me that the Indian government now might be saying to its universities, if you invent something useful, we want to get the benefit, the economic benefit out of it. And the way to do that is to force this, force it by assigning these penalties.
Right.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's also in which, you know, if you have a culture of, you know, sharing research and pursuing things for their own sake, you know, knowledge for its own sake, kind of, as opposed to coming up with something useful, right, that you can then market and sell. I mean, if you're able to say, all right, you guys will have this percentage, you know, as you said, there's, you know, for some people who are able to arrange if they get 30% or more, but basically you're guaranteeing a kind of thing. I mean, one of my questions is kind of like, to what extent can a researcher enforce the deal that they've had with the university beforehand, whether it's for 30% or whatever. I mean, with this bill, then they would have a document that they could go to and be able to enforce it, and then that might create a more self-interested researchers who are going to look to make something to put on the market as opposed to simply just sharing the knowledge.
Well, there was in the United States this mythology, which in fact is still being held onto, that the role of the university is to develop pure research, you know, basic research, and make it available to all. You know, the goal is not to create a drug and then market it or sell it to a pharmaceutical company and make money on it. You know, that's anathema to a pure academic. So that mythology sort of held sway. But I don't know enough about Indian universities to know whether that's the case, that was the case there, and they felt that they had to put in these draconian penalties in order to get people to change their attitudes. Does that make any sense?
I don't know, I think the penalties do make sense actually, just because following laws, the Indian system is not too good with that. It's not as good as the US
Okay.
system.
Now we're
So-
getting somewhere.
Also, one other thing to keep in mind is that universities in India right now, I gave an example of 2.5 million reactor or some, you know, research grant. But the research grants in India are typically not as big. They don't have as much of a value as they do over here. So if I were just thinking in terms of actual absolute value of money, 50% of a small amount is really not all that big. So I don't know if they were looking at those values when they determined 50% would be the value for imposing. And maybe they were not farsighted enough to foresee that maybe later on in the future the grants could get bigger and their investment in universities could get bigger. Actually, they're trying to, so one of the objectives that I failed to maybe highlight over here is they want the universities to become self-sufficient. And I briefly mentioned that. They just want them to get enough wealth from this process of commercialization that they don't have to support the universities. So, yeah. That doesn't answer the question about 50% of funding.
What does the business community say about this proposed legislation?
The business community, well, I didn't read so much from the business community.
Sure.
But whatever I did, they are usually negative. No one is really, this proposal, not a lot of people are for it actually right now. Probably a reason why it's been taking them so long. This particular bill was proposed in the 2010 budget, so 2 months ago, or 1 month ago in February, but it's not been passed yet. So it's taking a lot of time. It has to do a lot of brushing up and polishing. There are just technical flaws over there, and policy flaws that they have to address. It's pretty incomplete in the way I think.
Where are you getting your information from?
This one,
Yeah.
I got
I
one
mean, it
from,
seems like it would be very difficult.
to get, it's been very difficult actually. But Googling it just got me blogs and stuff, which I put on that one slide. So I went through the University of Michigan's Maryland website. Columbia also,
Is there a legislative history or
legislative history of copyright?
Of this bill,
it is what?
of this law.
In what sense? Like it's derived from US Bayh-Dole Act in that sense, or?
Well, who did it and what
Oh, I
their,
see.
what
Who's
their,
lobbying for it,
Who's lobbying for it?
and who's opposing it.
and who's opposing it.
Yeah.
It must be, I just don't know. I
Sure.
should look into that. Yeah. If I can get information, I will look into that. It's, like I said,
I don't know where you would get the information, but
Yeah.
there might be some government publications
Yeah.
or newspapers. If there's a technical newspaper like in the United States, a lot of technical stuff is the San Jose Mercury News because they cover Silicon Valley.
right.
And they tend to be, they have reporters dealing with this technology, and then there are different journals that cover this sort of thing. I mean, it is all very new, but you might be able to find some history of this, get a sense of who's for it, who's against it, and why.
Right. I mean, I know which political party has put forward, but I don't know if there were actually business and other factors behind putting this forward. Can you look into it? Definitely.
Well, it's curious. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, and the next one.
Next one.
Yeah. This is really
Okay.
yeah, I just don't see how patenting by itself is going to result in commercialization.
Right. That was one of the points I made also. There is no relationship between patent and commercialization. In fact, like I showed the example of CSIR,
Yeah.
only 5.7% of their patents went into licenses.
But Victor, to your previous point, the government's motive might likely be the lockout of, foreign entities, patenting that specific
Well, that's what
technology.
I would
That's, I think,
So the reasoning behind the theoretical correlation between patenting and commercialization is that the patent owner can if they release commercial products they license the patent to commercial companies, they can make money from these licenses or from the products, and so there's some financial incentive behind utilizing the inventions, but that's just the theoretical reasoning behind the correlation.
Yeah.
Right, but that correlation might not be true. It's true for US, but it might not be true for India because there are not as many private businesses and that actually deal with science and technology innovations. So if they were thinking that patenting will lead commercialization, the society is just not set up like that, where you can easily
Yeah.
commercialize.
I can't fathom what other idea would motivate the legislators to come up with this, other than protecting it against foreign competition. No.
When I read the text, the bottom line of the objectives was ultimately we want to make the university self-sufficient. So that, I kind of read it the way that they're saying all these cheesy things where they want to promote creativity, innovation, blah, blah, but at the end, it seems like all they care is they don't want to fund these universities. That's with my personal opinion without really
So you
backing
think,
it up.
maybe
So
they
there's-
did this because they wanted the universities to be able to sustain their research enterprises with the revenue from the patenting and commercialization?
I think ultimately that is a huge factor. I think so.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it seemed to me that they wouldn't even come close.
They wouldn't even come close. That's the point. That's the point that the critics
Well,
have
the
mentioned.
history of innovation at universities in the United States has been that, a couple of universities have had a couple of major inventions that supplied a lot of money, and most of them don't make any money at all off anything.
Right, Bayh-Dole Act, they say that there are only a few institutions that actually come up with products that can be commercialized, and of those few institutions, there are only a very few departments and specific items that are commercialized. So it's like a subset of a subset that really gets the money, and then it's a whole lot of money.
And then of those who were formed, there's a very small percentage who were successful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You know, University of Wisconsin had a patent on warfarin, limiting major drugs, and managed to make a huge amount of money on that. But I think it's fair to say that the rest of the tail of that distribution made virtually nothing. And it wasn't like they had a string of hits. So I can't imagine that they would think that the proceeds from these inventions would support the university.
That's true, and
I mean, a politician can think anything.
that's what I'm
That's also
yeah,
true.
I know.
You know, so,
That's what
I
I'm
mean,
thinking right now.
so who knows? But it just seems to me to be how you know, we're seeing that in the United States. It doesn't have to be true or logical for people to believe it.
Right. So they have appointed now a committee to actually go and look at these issues and work them out. The results are not out there yet, so I can't really comment on what they have to say.
If you have to break it out to a binary decision, does the university system provide professors and researchers more incentives or greater incentives for teaching or research? Do you have any insight
Teaching.
on that? Teaching?
Oh yeah, with my eyes closed, teaching.
Okay.
It's just impossible to think that you're going to go in India and then have research. It's just, the infrastructure does just not exist. They're starting up, but that's what most people do.
Any questions? I'm gonna hog the whole question session.
Okay,
Go to, yeah, go to the next slide.
Okay, so I guess I talked about, do you want me to read through these slides again?
No, I'm
Just
wondering
read
what-
faster.
actually, it's better if you don't.
Okay.
But, you know, if you have any questions, just ask.
What is what is the purpose of that quote at the bottom? Why is saying that patent
The reason I pointed out was if you're really trying to address the issue of that people are not patenting, to come up with such a huge legislation where people are being fined 50% of the grant and going through and making it an act, a process that has to go through the proper legislative processes, it's just too much work, too much money goes into it. It's waste. Just make a policy change. Have the government encourage patenting in different ways. There are different ways to implement that.
So that seems like it could be one of the checks to, I mean, it does seem like it's a positive sort of direction to move in. Maybe it is just sort of too much, too fast, or infrastructure won't support it.
Yeah, I think definitely, I agree. This one, the Bayh-Dole, the Indian Equivalent Act bill is too much too fast. This is a cultural issue, and to address a cultural issue by imposing fines is just not going to happen. Especially in India, oh God, it's not going to happen.
That's what
Yeah,
I like
that's-
about your presentation. You're realistic about what's really going to happen. It was like this is totally off the subject, but I went to a talk at noon today about the U.S. tax structure, tax policy, and the person was talking about the inequities in the tax policy and how you know, something I've observed, the more money I make, the less taxes I pay. You know, I mean, it's like not the less absolutely, but the less percentage, because you have more and more deductions. And he was pointing out all of these flaws in the tax structure, but the assumption always was that everybody's paying all their taxes. And during the Bush administration, they essentially gutted the IRS in terms of enforcement. So the truth may be that, like so many other countries, that people don't pay the taxes. And I mean, again, that was my observation in Brazil. One of the reasons you have the enormous financial inequity in the country is that the people who make the money don't pay the taxes. surprised me of doing work in a developing country is that in a developing country, it's just that more people are poor, not that everyone is. And that even in a developing country, there was a whole class in Brazil that was an international class that, you know, vacationed on the Riviera and had apartments in Miami and lived an international lifestyle that, you know, any American would envy.
Sure.
But it was not, that's not what made it a developing country. So I can only assume that I like that explanation, that they had to put a 50% fine in because they'd be lucky to get 10%. That's kind of cynical, but, and I'm putting words in your mouth, so you can defend the country better than that. But that may have been what it is, because what you're saying here is that, which is true, that prior to the Bayh-Dole Act, very little was commercialized because the government couldn't do it. They just retained the rights and never did anything with them. But after the Bayh-Dole Act, it wasn't exactly a torrent of patents and commercialized inventions. At least I don't think so.
Right. And see, in India, they don't even retain the rights. The government does not retain the rights like in the US. It was done prior to the Bayh-Dole Act. So, yeah, I don't know too much about tax evasion and things like that in India, so I will not comment. But I know that people do, like, people do pay their taxes, that's not a problem. However, they have means of escaping the different brackets. You know, they play tricky, I would say. You know, it's tax evasion. So they pay, but they might not pay the whole amount.
Right.
So over here, though, I just don't know how they're going to implement the 50%. I anticipate a lot of universities would just say that we just don't have the money. How are we going to pay them? Give us the money and then we will pay you. You know, something like that. Because these people are not making too much
Well,
money.
there's two things going on. I mean, one is it doesn't take that much to do a patent, and the university might find it cheaper to have a lawyer on the staff to get patents on a consistent basis. Then, you know, this might encourage that. I mean,
Right. The patenting process, though, in India, as I understand, what I gleaned from all these papers, is not that easy. Like, they're spending a good bit of money on getting these patents in place.
That's probably made, yeah.
So I don't know how much money they're making and how does it compare with the United States, but there's a lot of resources that goes. But then again, it seems like, speaking from my personal point of view, things are just made difficult in India, even if it's easy, because made difficult in India, even if it's easy, because they want to employ like 4 people for the one task that they have to do. There's so many people, and it's really bureaucratic after some time. Which is actually the case over here too. I wouldn't say the US is less bureaucratic because I've worked for national labs and oh god. To get security clearance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Especially being not a foreign national.
where did you work?
I worked at Oak Ridge National Labs, but that's one of the more relaxed. It's not too bad to do there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions that we're monopolizing this.
Can you go on to the next?
Next slide.
Is that the next one? Yeah.
I'm surprised at that statistic for Stanford. I wouldn't have thought it was that high. But
Yeah.
Do you know what it is here?
In the University of
Sure.
Michigan?
much lower.
Yeah, I hear it's less than, is it less than 5?
Yeah, well, it's less than 10.
It's getting
Yeah,
lower.
the statistics that Michael gave us, I think, were it's single digits definitely.
Yeah.
And the ones that are successful are less than 3%
Yeah.
of those that are licensed.
Who gave you that?
Michael Collin?
Collett.
Michael
Collett.
Collin. Yeah, Collin. He's the president for the tech transfer office here at UM. Not the
He's a for-hire CEO of the startup
There.
ventures that they actually operationalize.
Yeah, he's a German guy who's successfully done like 28 startups or something like that. It's crazy. Yeah. So that was one of the things I was actually going to say before is that U of M is, I think, 3rd in the country on average. It's 3rd to 5th, depending on like the way you see marketing innovations come out. It's usually Stanford 1, MIT 2, and then Wisconsin's in the top 5 someplace too.
Hopkins is another one.
Johns
Johns
Hopkins,
Hopkins.
yeah, it was for a couple of columns and medical stuff. It was definitely in the top 5.
Yeah, Michael's numbers were only for the healthcare side of the business.
Yeah, but almost all of them, except for Stanford, are in the single digits.
High single digits.
Yeah. So which was one of the interesting things when you were talking about how like 5% of the innovations from the universities in India are marketed. That's actually great. I mean, how we would see it here at U of M is like if U of M marketed. I'm what she was talking about before, not that slide. Earlier she was talking about because about 5% of like networked and government labs and stuff, and patentee stuff. So if the universities would also get 5%.
They commercialize their patents. 5% commercialize.
Right. Yeah. Ours is less than that. Yeah, like U of M's is less. And that's what I was saying. Like, and for a research university, I mean, we are definitely considered to be a research university here. So I mean, that's actually not terrible. It depends on how successful the commercialization is, though. Usually, when U of M does it, when universities in the U.S. decide to take a patent that's been created from one of their professors or a project that they've done, it's usually very specific. They've got a plan on how to market it, and they're taking it from a pool of hundreds of patents. So I don't know if you might want to look into the system and see if the universities there have a system to market patents too. And you could look that up and see just loosely to see if they have something like a tech transfer office, which here is where the transition occurs between the patent and the marketable innovation.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of times when universities do good research, they will often send their ideas abroad. Like recently, 2 weeks ago, there was this one guy who was researching in southern India, had some nice Big Bang theory. He just sent it to CERN. He wouldn't even worry to send it to the government of India. And now he's being funded by CERN to do research. So that's...
And because of that, he doesn't have to worry about penalties then, right? Because the
Yeah.
funding's not coming from the
That's
government.
right.
So, yeah, that's good.
Okay.
I just find that amusing. Anybody else?
The 2.5 million figure?
No, not the 2.5 million figure.
No, the
Oh,
quote, just the quote, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
self-sufficient, yeah.
The bill aspires to make them self-sufficient by taking their money away. It's pretty awesome.
I mean, I find, of course, I'm a little bit cynical about even in the U.S., the degree to which the universities now hope that entrepreneurship is going to pull them out of their economic troubles. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's not the way it works. But I find that interesting.
So these are arguments that were made in the parliament when they were actually talking about this bill actually.
So this is where I would look for this legislative history.
Right.
Fine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so this
Yeah,
was one
it's-
argument that they made. They want to be self-sufficient. So the monetary argument seems to be prevailing. Anything else?
Well, this is all monetary. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the motivation.
But when you read the text, they start off with like we should have India, innovate more, create more,
Of course.
compete globally and all that. And then after 3-4 paragraphs, the bottom line is something quite different, but just to make self-sufficient. Yeah.
Well, at some point in time, you have to demonstrate the ROI being positive.
Yes.
Any questions?
Interesting.
Let's just go through the rest of it quickly.
Okay. I guess we paused over here
Yeah.
earlier. So should I skip through this one?
Yeah, just.
Okay.
Is for the third point about it should be a single entity and not multiple parties, is it not sort of divisible in the sense that multiple people can hold the patent if there are, I guess, joint patent holders?
I guess it's true, but the idea over here is after commercialization, whom does the license go to? Does it just go to one party who's or should the government in this bill also try to regulate the license aspect of it so that you don't create monopolies?
Okay.
Okay?
Well, I would just suggest that, you know, for your paper, that you try to get some of this legislative history and find out what is motivating this and
Okay.
what people said was motivating it. I think what you have here is the surface.
Mhm.
And I don't know that you can find out. I don't know that how I would do it to find out. It's not like I'm asking you to do something that I know how to do. But if you can find out a little more on the motivation of the legislators for
Right.
doing this, although it could be that what you know, it could be as simple as what you say it is. They wanted to try to compensate for reduced funding of universities by having them generate inventions that will make money, and that this is the only way they can think of to do it. Maybe as simple as that.
Well, I'm thinking making the patenting process a lot less complicated might actually spur more patents than the fines would, you know. We talked about how complicated the process is.
Yeah.
Right, in the cause.